Now it's my opportunity to welcome our speaker. I'm going to read this from the stuff you gave me yesterday. That was really great. Michelle, thank you very much for being here. Michelle Mayot has been a middle school teacher and middle school and high school level teacher in math for 11 years. She's been at the Department of Education as the mathematics specialist for 3 years, and has also done some work as an independent contractor for NASA, integrating math, science, and literacy-based education on satellites and missions. So it's very interesting. So she has boldly gone where none of us have gone. So it's my pleasure to welcome Michelle Mayot, and without further ado, a big round of applause.
Can you all hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for coming out today. I'm very excited to be here. I'm excited to be the first presenter for EDUcadia. No pressure. We're going to start today. We're going to do some looking at the Common Core. So let me pull up our PowerPoint. You should have a copy of this in your folder. There are some additional handouts I put on your tables. If there aren't enough, let me know and I can provide more. There's a colored handout, and then there's one with the 4 claims. So if you're missing those, just let me know. So I'm Michelle Mayot, the math specialist at the Department of Education, and I've been doing this job now for 3 years. And this is my favorite part of the job, where I get to come out into the field and work with teachers and share what's going on, not just here in our state, but also nationwide, because the Common Core isn't just here in Maine. There are 46 states across the nation that have adopted the Common Core standards for mathematics and ELA. And so we are not in this alone. And so as the president was talking here, he's saying, you know, work together, be collaborative, and that's happening across the nation with Common Core. So our agenda for today is we're going to do an overview of the Common Core state standards, where they came from, what it's about. We're going to look at the standards for mathematical practices with a focus of problem solving. So first we're going to start with a deep investigation of the math practices and what they are and what does that mean and who are they for. Talk about the transition timeline, and for our 6-8 group, because this is middle school and high school, transitions in the NECAP, there will be some changes, not in the current session that you're doing right now, because this is NECAP season. It will be for next year's NECAP. There will be some minor changes to the NECAP in the mathematics portion of the assessment, not in the ELA, just in mathematics. And for those of us at the high school, in the 2014-15 school year, when we start with the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortia, we will no longer be doing the SAT. The high school will be doing the Smarter Balance Assessment. We'll talk about available resources, the resources I have here in the state that I've developed, and then national resources that I have links to as well. And question and answer time for things that I might not have thought of that you have on your mind that I need to hear about. So, instead of listening to me tell you about Common Core, I'll do it this way.
For decades, we've been debating how to improve schools in the United States. This has been born from a realization that, in an ever-changing world, our students need better knowledge and tools to prepare them to compete in the global economy. In math, science, and reading, our students haven't been keeping pace with their most advanced international peers. Persistent and dramatic achievement gaps still exist in our country. College remediation rates are abysmal, and employers say students are unprepared to perform and thrive in the workforce. The need to audaciously confront these issues resulted in a remarkable collaborative effort, the promise of consistent, shared, and rigorous education standards for all students that align with college and work expectations, a new set of ambitious academic standards to set the foundation for even greater student growth and success. These standards, now being implemented by more than 44 states across the nation, were built upon strengths and lessons learned in states. They were informed by other top-performing countries and grounded in research and evidence. And practitioners, content experts, teachers, researchers, and leaders in higher education and business all came together to make it happen. These standards were developed by states and for states. They are the clearest statements yet about the knowledge and skills that students need to master in order to be prepared for college and the workforce. The standards were designed with great care to ensure that they were clear, consistent, rigorous, and relevant. All are undeniably important when it comes to preparing students to successfully meet the demands of college and the workplace. Thanks to the unprecedented collaboration among states, young people, regardless of their background or where they live, will be taught to standards that, once mastered, will have prepared them for college and career success. Take a glimpse into the promise of these standards. States do the hard work of implementing them with fidelity and care. Use what you hear to start engaging conversations, stimulate creativity in the classroom, help align expectations, and get communities involved. Find out why state standards are far from common.
So this is
For decades, we've been debating how to improve schools in the United States. This is
there we go. I apologize. So that video was from the Hunt Institutes. They have a series of videos for both math and ELA talking about Common Core state standards. And I think the longest one is maybe 10 to 12 minutes long. And so when you're going out into the community, when you're talking to parents, when you're talking to school board members, they're good little snippets to give information that is really worthwhile. So the Common Core Standards for Mathematics has a different setup. We start with the 8 mathematical practices, and these are for grades K through 12. And these are in the introduction of the document. And I know when I got that purple little book with the learning results, I went to my grade, looked at the standards, and these are great, closed the book, shoved it on the shelf. I pulled it out to level off the overhead projector or, things like that because it was the perfect size. And so we don't want to just go to our grade, look them over, close the book, and forget about them. There's a lot of information. The document for the math standards between the document for the standards and Appendix A is 300 pages worth of information and material. It's a lot of stuff. And so if I go to my grade, I miss the introduction where these 8 mathematical practices are. And these are like our habits of mind. And these are intended for students, not for teachers. And they're K through 12. They start in kindergarten and we progress through them and increase our performance with them over that K-12 continuum. For grades K-8, these are organized by the content standards. And when we get to the high school, we do conceptual categories because we do individual grades, kindergarten through grade 8, but when we get to the high school, we do math very different in the high school. Not every high school student experiences math the same way or in the exact same classes. Depending on their ability level, they can be going into pre-algebra, algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, or you can do an integrated approach where you get a little bit of everything. And so where we have those differences in our state, imagine what it's like across all 50 states, what high school math looks like in all these different districts across the nation. So the writers felt if we did these conceptual categories, then we can organize our high school courses around conceptual categories, taking the pieces from each of those categories that create the curriculum for those courses that our students are taking at the high school. And that's where Appendix A came in. That is a possible pathway for developing traditional Algebra 1 geometry, Algebra 2, or the integrated approach using the standards. These are just possible pathways. It's a starting point. It's a place to look at, but we're not saying it's what you have to do. Tables and glossaries are included, and all too often it's the high school teachers who see the tables and glossaries because it's right after the high school standards. And so our elementary and middle school teachers sometimes don't know there's tables and glossaries in the back that refer to their standards. And so we have definitions and examples in tables and glossaries for standards as far down as kindergarten. And so really pay attention to those. And then, of course, Appendix A. In addition to having the high school courses, they're talking about accelerated courses starting in the middle school. So for that middle school student who's going to finish that first year of high school math before they leave 8th grade, what would that look like in Common Core? And it's very rigorous, very challenging, because they are taking 3 years worth of standards and fitting it into 2. They are not omitting anything. And unfortunately, that's what we've been doing when we accelerate students. Oh, they're ready for pre-algebra in 7th grade, so we're not going to do 7th grade standards, we're going to focus on pre-algebra. Oh, they're ready for algebra in 8th grade, we're not going to focus on 8th grade standards, we're focusing on high school. So effectively, we have punched holes in their foundation of understanding and built their knowledge base of mathematics on Swiss cheese. So when they get into high school, and it may not be that first high school course or the second one, they hit that wall, and all of a sudden math doesn't make sense. I know I've had students crying in my room. I don't get this. I never have to study before. Why do I have to now? What's wrong with me? And it's not what's wrong with me. It's what gaps did we provide for you by pushing you forward and ignoring that foundational knowledge. And so when they did this accelerated course pathways, they took that into consideration and said, let's not make Swiss cheese of a foundation for our students. Let's make sure the foundation is solid, because I know I don't want to build a house on a rocky foundation, because it's not going to last very long. So you should have in your folder this handout. And you can see that this was taken from Kentucky Department of Education. They did a really good job, and instead of reproducing the same thing, I asked if I could just use it, and they said feel free. So this is an overview, the broad picture of the Common Core State Standards for Mathematics. And you'll see you have the grades across the top, kindergarten through high school. You have the 8 mathematical practices, which go that whole continuum, K through 12. Notice this is color-coded. All those light blue, starting in kindergarten and going up to high school, that is the progression of understanding and learning for number and quantity of the high school. So my foundation starts in kindergarten with counting and cardinality. Notice this domain begins and ends. We have domains that begin and end, which we have never had before in our learning results. We have the same domain, K through 12. Here they're beginning and ending, and you'll see number and operations base 10, kindergarten through grade 5. Fractions is the one that really catches everyone's attention, grades 3 through 5. That's the study of fractions. That's where I learned to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Then that knowledge is applied through ratio proportional relationships in the number system. So the nitty-gritty of the learning takes place, and we don't just start talking fractions in grade 3. There's those building blocks and the foundations starting in the K2, where you're talking about a half a pie or a half of a cookie, and you get that starting of understanding of partitioning and portions. But the real roll up your sleeves and start working with fractions using the formal information numerator denominator starts taking place in 3rd grade. So this is a big shift for us. The one domain that stays the same is geometry. That's K through 12. But what we do in that progresses throughout. And so this is just that quick picture to get you to notice some quick changes. These are some significant changes for us, beginning and ends of domains. I can see what is building the base for what's coming next through this snapshot. So that's something that you might want to share back in the district with your departments, with your curriculum coordinators, with your parents, so that they can see and make sense of how mathematics really truly works. So if I was to start off digging into the Common Core, my beginning place needs to be those 8 mathematical practices. This is the foundation. This is my building block for student understanding, are these mathematical practices. Think of these as my habits of mind. Then there are progression documents. I have 3 different forms of progression documents that are on my website. One of them we just looked at, where it shows the progression of the domains. Then we have it with the individual standards, more fine-grained, taking each of those domains and saying, okay, this standard builds to the next standard. And then there is a narrative progression document that has been written by Bill McCullum, one of the lead writers for the Common Core State Standards, and his team out in Arizona, that talks about developmentally, what does that look like, what does it sound like across that continuum of learning and understanding. And so these 3 forms of these documents can be very helpful as I'm looking at my curriculum and figuring out where is my student struggling, what was the prior knowledge, where are they going next. Critical focus areas. For K-8, in the beginning of each grade, there is a narrative description of what you're going to be doing in that grade. We haven't had narratives for math in our standards. It's like, here's the grade, here's the standard, performance indicators, and that's it. So here, they give you this nice narrative, these little paragraphs of, these are the areas that you're going to focus on, and here's why. Here's the importance of these areas. Here's prior knowledge students need to be bringing with them in order to perform well. And here's where you're headed next. So those critical focus areas can be very helpful when you're looking at it as a lens of how do I develop curriculum with these standards. If I think of those focus areas as a unit of study and then align the individual standards to that unit of study, I can start developing my curriculum through that lens of the critical focus areas and what's important for my students to understand by the time they leave my classroom. We're asking that you align your current practices to the Common Core, not the main learning results. The department is not going to do a standard-to-standard alignment because I can't. They are so different in nature. There is no way I can do a standard-to-standard alignment. And so instead of wasting time and money on that, we decided what we are wanting you to do is take a look at your current practices and do an alignment that way. Meaning, what am I currently doing in the classroom that I need to continue doing that is still required in the Common Core standards? And then ask yourself, am I doing it to the depth and rigor of the new set of standards, yes or no? Chances are the answer is probably going to be, no, not really. Then we're going to say, what am I currently doing that I will no longer need to do? And where did it go? Did it go up a grade? Did it go down a grade? And again, that same question, am I doing it in the depth and rigor that is required of the new set of standards? The third question you need to ask yourself, what am I not doing that I'm going to be asked to do? And where is it coming from? And again, is that depth and rigor there? And when I ask these questions, where is it going to, where is it coming from, the depth and rigor, if I was to take all of my resources that I do for that topic that I'm no longer going to be focusing on, and it's moving somewhere, the goal would be to pick up that box of goodies, walk it down the hall to who's getting it next, and sit down and have a conversation and say, here's what I used to do, here's the things I used to use, but it doesn't really touch upon this, this, or this in the Common Core. So that person who's getting this has a starting place. And I would hope if it's coming up to you or going down to you, the person who's bringing that is doing the same thing for you. And this gets that K-12 continuum conversation going on across the grades so that we know what's going on in each of our classrooms. Too often, we work alone. and we can't be working alone anymore. And so open up those doors of communication, start sharing and having conversations about what's working, what's not working, what seems to be missing, and how can we address that. You have on your tables, I gave you a summary sheet for the 4 claims for the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortia. And this is my stab at it, and the document that I used for this is 145 pages in length, so I put reference in this little summary where in the document, what pages you can go to get more detailed information about what they're talking about. And later on, when we talk about resources, I'll show you the website that I have with a link to the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortia. And they just actually released some new sample task items that are computer generated that we can explore with later on, as well as the paper copies that I brought for us to play with later on this afternoon as well. And so when you look at these assessments, that next assessment is going to be very, very different than what we are currently doing. And so claim 1 is the closest match to what we're currently doing, which is procedural knowledge and fluency. Claims 2, 3, and 4, when you read about them, they are very deeply integrating those mathematical practices with the content standards. So if you are not giving opportunity for your students to develop skills in those mathematical practices, they are going to have some issues later on when they're working with the mathematics. Our content standards within the Common Core really embrace that concept of these mathematical practices, and some of them are written in such a manner that you can't help but be doing these math practices in order to attain that standard. And so they really looked at deeply integrating the math practices in with the content. I think what you're hearing is my little bling. So my motto here, when we're working with Common Core, is never, ever, ever work alone. You cannot and should not be doing any of this work by yourself. There's a lot that needs to be done, and it's just too much to do on your own. Even though I am it at the Department of Ed for the math, so when you call up and need to talk to someone about math at the Department of Ed, I am the Department of Mathematics at the Department of Ed. But I don't work on this alone because I have colleagues from other states that I continually email, call, meet with, talk to, and we are sharing resources to make sure that we're not trying to do it by ourselves, because there is so much that is needed to support the implementation of the Common Core that not one person can do it alone. And so I really encourage you not to work alone when you're doing Common Core. So some shifts for math. The big things. Focus. It is narrow and deeper. We are looking at less to cover, and I really dislike using the word cover. I have to cover the standards. If I'm covering it, do the students really truly understand it? I want to go deeper so that they can really comprehend what we're doing and get that conceptual understanding of the mathematics. And so by doing fewer standards, we're able to go deeper and really develop that foundational understanding of mathematics and that relevance of, when will I ever need this? Who cares? How many times do we get that question? So when will I use this later in life? Why do I need to know this? Why are we doing this?
Michelle,
Yes?
I somehow have the impression that there actually is more content with the standards, and that we need to whittle that down. Am I wrong there?
I don't see it as more content.
Or more into the standards? You get the sense of more.
You get the sense of more. I'm hearing that a lot. If I talk about, I know she's like, great. There are, between the K-12 continuum, 300 standards. That seems overwhelming. That's over 13 years of study. If I talk about ELA, they say they have 10 standards. Their 10 standards are broken down by progressional learning. So underneath those standards, you have a list of, and they do it by grade bands. And if I was to do that in mathematics, we would be very similar. So I go back to that big chart with the domains. Those domains are the standards, that overarching idea of the ELA. Our standards are the individual progression of understanding and learning within those domains. And so when you get into the body of the document, they are arranged by cluster. And so a cluster is a group of standards that support the understanding of one another for a bigger concept and idea. When you look at those 4 claims, the assessment is based at the cluster level, not at the individual standard level. And so if I'm going to be teaching an individual standard and do it in isolation one by one, then that concept of more is accurate. But the way these standards are written, they are not to be taught in isolation. I can't teach them in isolation. I have to teach them at that cluster level because each of those components are important for that bigger understanding. And so I can't say today we're going to talk about, let's say, geometry and look at area and just focus on an area standard and check that off, because within that I have connections to expressions and equations because of the way I can demonstrate and use area. We can model area in multiple ways, and so I can teach area as a focus and connect multiple standards all at the same time and not teach in isolation. So that's a big shift for us to stop that checklist. These are not set out to be a checklist. And I was on a webinar a couple weeks back with Jason Zimba, who is one of the other lead writers for the Common Core. And he was addressing this very question about prioritizing the standards. And he said, if you take that view of having the Common Core standards as a grab bag and reaching in and pulling out the ones you think are relevant, then we're doing the same old thing we have always done and we are not making progress. And the standards were not developed to be taught individualized item by item. They were developed to be taught together to show the significance and the relevance of understanding and how math builds upon itself and has this support structure, because making that coherence, that connection from grade to grade, from concept to concept is where we fall flat. And that's a huge shift for us, because that's where, how many times do I teach my students a concept and then they go to science class and act like they've never analyzed data before in their lives? And so making these connections for my students are really, really important. And that's the purpose, the intention of these standards, is to make those connections clear by clustering or grouping these standards within instructional time rather than in isolation.
Thank you.
Does that help, or clear as mud, as I used to ask my students? Clear as mud, got it, right? So the coherence piece is really important, because if I don't show my students how things are connected, how are they going to make these connections? It's not going to happen. And fluency is part of the standards. We do have an expectation of speed and accuracy with simple calculations. And there are specific grade levels where it tells you the expectation in that standard is that you are fluent with your math facts of multiplication. And so that is, we're not saying drill and kill is gone. We have to have this great balance, because that expectation of being fluent in number sense is still there. And we're still going to hold them to that. Any other questions before we continue? So, how might this look in my classroom? Thoughts on that? And this is where you guys get to talk at me. What do you think? These shifts, the focus, the coherence, and the fluency. What might this look like in your classroom?
I think it's interesting when you said that things might go up or down. I feel, I'm teaching grade 5 and 6, I feel like everything is being pushed down yet to see where I would then take something up to Melissa. She's a grade ahead of me, so I don't know what I'm going to give to her. I don't see it going that way. I see it just going down. I'm not like.
Some of our work with fractions, because we started working with fractions at the K2 more strictly than what the Corps is asking us to do now. So some of that fraction work is shifting up. But a lot of it is shifting down because, let's face it, I taught middle school and high school. I was teaching fractions in 7th and 8th grade. I was teaching fractions when I was with my 11th grade students as well because they just don't get it. And so why not? What is the issue with fractions? It stems from place value, not having a deep understanding of place value. If I don't understand what 1 really is or what 10 really is, how can I take a part of that? And so this shift of focus in number sense and place value at the elementary grades hopefully is going to give a better understanding of number sense and how it works so that when we start talking about fractions, it makes more sense because now I can talk about a part. There's a great example on the illustrative math site. It's in grade 6 under number. And it's called cup of rice. It's a task. And it talks about the serving of rice is 2/3. I ate 1 cup. How many servings did I have? And looking at, and they give the scenario of how 2 students answered, and they're different answers, so what went wrong? And it goes back to when we teach fractions, we teach it 1 whole. So the student who has that misconception sees the 1 cup as the whole, 2/3, and then there's 1/3 left, rather than the 2/3 is the whole, because that's my serving size. And so making changes in the way we're looking at fractions and talking about fractions is huge. And so there's, yeah. What types of instruction can we utilize to help our students build a deeper understanding in mathematics? Do you think sit and get, stand and deliver is going to work for us? No, and that's kind of what I'm doing here, so we're going to stop that really soon. Because I am not a proponent of sit and get, because that is just not how it works. In mathematics, if I can see it, if I can touch it, if I can play with it, then I can get it. And that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that what we're having our students do is engaging. It's getting them to think about it. And I'm not giving the answers. I'm not about the answer, man. I am not. And my students would come up, is the answer right? I don't know. How'd you get it? Well, can't you just tell me if it's right? I don't know. How'd you get it? But did I get the right answer? Does it matter? How'd you get it? And so really getting them, and then, you know, some of our brightest students, their response is, well, I just know. I just know. Oh, you picked it up over there on the way to school, down the sidewalk. Oh, come on, you're going to be the answer today. Come with me. And so making our thinking visible is really important, and that's something I, as the instructor, needs to model for my students. Because when we, let's be serious here, in the kneecap, our items that are the most challenging for our students, short answer to and constructive response. They do horrible at those. And it's because they cannot explain or justify their reasoning. Because they can't put into words what it is that they are doing mathematically. And so I need to be modeling that for my students. A great literacy strategy for that is the think aloud. You go into an ELA classroom and they're doing think alouds all the time. They're talking about the story and they're thinking about how this character relates to that character. Well, math has a story unto itself. Each of those things is a character, and let's talk about how they relate to each other as I'm reading the problem. Let's do a think aloud. Let's talk about the questions I ask myself. I'm good at math because I ask myself questions all the time. I used to tell my students, people thought mathematicians were crazy because they talk to themselves all the time. Well, you have to when you're solving problems. It's not that they're crazy. It's that they're thinking out loud. And I tell them, I want you to be a little crazy, and I want to hear you talk to yourself, and I want to see what you're thinking because I'm not in your head. And so we need to be modeling that for our students. and doing think alouds and making our thinking visible so they know how to make their thinking visible. So now this is your turn. So we're going to do some problem solving in Common Core. It says Maria saved $24. She saved 3 times as much as Wayne. So here's your task. We're going to give you a few minutes. And this is on my own time, and then to my elbow buddy, share my thinking. So on your own, using the words of the above story, make a math picture. So here's my story. Maria saved $24. She saved 3 times as much as Wayne. Next, you're going to share your picture with your partner and then within your groups. No, not me. So, all right, honesty. Who immediately said the answer is 8 in their head? Okay? Because we have that relationship of 24 and 3. Oh, Wayne has $8, right?
I never got that far.
And so we assumed, as soon as we saw the problem, we picked the 2 numbers out of the problems because that's what you do with word problems, right? You grab the numbers because that's what I'm dealing with. This is math. It's not English. I don't need the words. And I said, well, 3 times 8 is 24. 24 divided by 3 is 8. So Wayne has $8 and I'm done. So we made the assumption of what the question was going to be before the question was even asked. How often do our students do that? And they give us the wrong answer because they're not answering the question that was asked. They answered the question they thought it was going to be in their heads. And how often do we ourselves do that? And are we modeling that for our students? Because where are they learning this? Where does that come from? So was it a challenge to kind of change directions and say, I got to draw a picture for this? I got to do what? Because all I wanted was 8. The answer is 8. Kind of tough. Anybody do this using expressions or equations? Okay. I saw, boxes and little pictures. There was 2 stick figures. Wayne had 1 cube. Maria had 3 cubes. Thought that was really cute. Okay. So when you were talking to each other, what were you talking about? What were you saying about your picture, your math picture to each other? What kinds of things came out in the conversation that you were looking for? Nobody talked. I heard you. Heard you talk. Yeah, it's a camera now. Just ignore it. It goes away. So are you trying to figure out how do I show this with pictures? Was that the big problem? How do I do this with pictures? Pardon?
So proud of my picture.
You have wonderful Italian shoes on.
Italian shoes.
How can he buy Italian shoes? He makes so little money.
He knows somebody. So what might a teacher be doing while this activity is going on in the classroom? What might you do as a teacher? Listening, going around, looking, seeing what's happening, picking out pieces of information. So when I asked this question about the 24 and the 3 with Maria and Wayne, did I get more than just the answers 8 and saying, okay, they know how to multiply and divide? Was there more to what I was getting from student work than saying, how much does Wayne have? Getting a lot more. I'm seeing I see that they see patterns. It's 3 sets of 8 or 8 sets of 3. I'm seeing they're making this connection between multiplication and repeated addition for some students. And so it's a richer way of getting to the answer of 8 for a question I haven't asked. But it's showing me the deep understanding my students have of that relationship between 24 and 3. And so the way I'm posing questions gives me the information I'm looking for that gets us to think deeper, rather than do you memorize your multiplication facts. I can do that in a different way with fluency. But to really get the understanding of how these are related together in number sense and structure and patterns, I can ask a different question. And then I can also take that story after we do a little work with it and have my students come up with the questions rather than me ask the question. So what kind of question would you ask based on this information? What things could you find out from this story if you were to ask a question? And it really gets them thinking about how math is useful. So we're going to take a look and see what this really looks like in a classroom. This comes from Inside Mathematics, which is a website with video vignettes.
Why do you do 24? Why do you think it's 24? This should be the dollars. Well, one time, 3 times. So she has. So she has 3 So she has $72. One time she has $24. Where do you see that? I think it's 8 times 3 because if she has $24, Wayne must have 8 because it says Maria said $24. Only they agree.
Do you see that in his picture? Where does it show in his picture that Wayne has $8? How could you add that to how could you add that to your math picture to show this idea that
Agree with me.
you show Wayne holding $24? So 8. How did you figure out that Wayne has 8 in your picture?
She has. How much does she have?
$24.
Together.
I see 3 equal groups. What are the 3 equal groups of it? Okay, let's see. 3 times what?
3
So she saved 3 times as much as Wayne. So Wayne has $24?
No, Maria has $24, and then Wayne has $8, and Wayne has $8.
How do you know that Wayne has
Hey, we got
8?
this thing. Well, because 8 times 3 equals 24.
And did you show that in a picture?
Yeah.
In a little tiny picture? Do you have like 3 $8 somewhere that maybe shows? I see 3 $24s. What are the 3 $24s mean?
Wayne had $8.
In your story, what does that mean? 3 times 3 $24s.
But I didn't put it in my picture.
See?
See, everybody agrees.
Why don't you agree?
I like you whoever.
What is your answer?
Because he didn't put 24 times 3. 24.
Maria only has $24.
3 times 8 equals 6. Add 8. It equals 82, not 72.
3 times as much as if she has 3, and she has 3 times. 8 times 24. Okay? 3 groups of 8 equals 24. So the answer is 8.
I counted to go to 24 times 3, and I counted the boxes, and then it was 8.
equal the same thing?
Yeah.
Could you try another strategy, like a break apart strategy?
Look right here. 4 times 3 equals 12. You put down the 2, add up the 1. So 3 times 2 equals 5 plus 1 more equals 6. So you put down the 6 and then you equals 62.
3 times 2. 3 equal groups of 2. 2 equal groups of 3. What is that?
6. Because I did this recently. It's 72 plus 3 times 2 equals 6.
Okay, you guys, we're going to share out some ideas and see if we can understand each other's pictures. Can I borrow that one too? Thanks. Can I borrow your picture too? And I think we got some in your cookie picture. Okay.
So, what do you think happened there? Poor little Alvin. He didn't agree. And they were like, just get it, right? That frustration level in that group. Oh, can't even.
Michelle, can you show a movie or something?
Give me a.
Okay, I'll take Dawn first.
Okay. So, you know, in the group, the kids were so frustrated with Alvin, who just couldn't seem to get it. Just agree with us. Everybody else agrees. And then, you know, working out the multiplication problem and seeing the error in his ways. 3 times 2 is 5 plus 1 is 6. Realizing, oh wait, you added instead of multiplied. And never once did the teacher say you're wrong. Never once. No, that's not the answer. Went back to, what were you thinking? What is this showing? What do you have? Where's your picture? It's really tiny. You know, so that classroom looked very different from what I traditionally see students working on worksheets at their tables, not talking to one another. We don't have a lot of that interaction in some, you know, to share our work is cheating sometimes. And here it's all about collaborating. And the students are talking and really making their thinking visible, forcing themselves to explain why they drew that picture, why it looks like this. The teacher was prompting with questions continually, not providing the answers, not saying, oh, way to go, that's right, you're on the right track. It was more, even if it was the way it was, and it's right, asking for more, digging deeper to get that understanding of, so how did you come up with that picture? Can you do it in a different way now that you've got it this way? Can you show me more? Okay, so food for thought. That is just a small clip of the entire lesson. At Inside Mathematics, you can get that entire lesson with videos for each of the sections, with the transcripts from the teachers, and also the handout of the questions. And you will be going to Inside Mathematics here shortly to do some investigations of your own in your groups. I gave you group numbers. So before we get there, what standards do you, what grade level do you think this was? How much was it? 4th grade? You're right. This was a 4th grade classroom, and the 4 stands for the grade level. OA is operations and algebraic thinking, that's the domain, and this was standard number 2 that was being addressed. And so that's the way we're coding the Common Core. We start with the grade, the domain, and then the standard number. At the high school level, instead of having a grade, you're going to have the conceptual category, then the domain, then the standard. Math practice 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. They really have to stick to it. Poor little Alvin. Construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. They were really asking, well, how do you get that? Why? Why do you think it's that? Is this right? I don't think so. Go back and check your math, because I don't think it's 62. I think it's 72. And then model with mathematics. Clearly, we are modeling here with mathematics. So you have this handout, and these are the math practices organized in a different way for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of skip ahead. And here's a video that you can watch while I step outside. And this is from, again, the Hunt Institute. And this is one of our lead authors talking about the math practices.
The standards have content standards, and they also have standards for mathematical practice. Those standards are meant to capture the processes and proficiencies that we want students to have, not just the knowledge and skills, but also how they use those knowledge and skills. They capture the habits of mind or thinking skills that are specific to mathematics. One of those skills is the ability to construct arguments and to reason and to think about why what you're doing works mathematically. That's a very important part of the practice standards. Students who are going to go on to whatever career they go on to, they're going to need to be able to use mathematics in that career. They might just be using the mathematics in their daily life. They read the newspaper and see some complicated data display that they need to understand, or understand the claim that's being made on that data. They might be going into a scientific or an engineering profession where they need higher levels of mathematics. It doesn't really matter. They need to be able to reason mathematically. So that's the very important group of practice standards at the beginning. There's also a practice standard about modeling. Modeling means taking a problem external to mathematics, thinking of a mathematical description of that problem that you can manipulate mathematically, coming to a mathematical solution, and then interpreting that solution back again in terms of the real problem. It's really the heart of what most students, when they go on, will be doing with mathematics, namely using it to solve problems outside of mathematics.
Modeling in the high school standards stresses that students have to be able to apply mathematics to real-world problems and problems arising outside of the mathematics classroom. This was something we heard very strongly from the business community and representatives from career and technical education who gave input into the standards. But it's not enough for kids to be able to do math when they're asked to do a math problem. The math problems that arise in everyday life aren't like word problems in books. The boss doesn't come in to you and say, Johnson, 2 trains left 2 cities 2 different times. When are they going to collide? What happens is that you're faced with a messy situation. You have to make assumptions. You have to simplify. You have to bring the tools you know to bear on the problem and analyze it and gain insight into it. Modeling and real-world applications in the standards are an important component of college and career readiness.
Another important standard is the standard about technology. The content standards themselves don't say much about technology because they're about mathematics. Technology can support students doing mathematics, but technology shouldn't be doing the mathematics. The kids should be doing the mathematics. And the technology practice standard basically says that you should learn to be strategic and wise about when it's appropriate to use technology and also when it's not appropriate to use technology, and how to interpret the results of a technological tool when you do use one. There's a group of standards at the end about structure and generalization. Those standards are really the heart and soul of mathematics in some sense, in the sense that when you look at a mathematical object, you want to be able to see it as having meaning, not just see it as something you have to sort of poke with a stick and hope it turns into what you want. So the standards about seeing mathematical structure and about generalizing are describing the sort of skills you want students to have as they work with mathematical expressions, equations, functions, geometric constructions. You want them to be able to see hidden structures, transform those objects into things that have a purpose and a use that they can be put to.
So the video with Jason and Bill McCullum talking about the 8 mathematical practices, I hope really brought home that message that these are a way for us to facilitate and support a change of culture in our classroom. That these 8 mathematical practices are here to help our students develop and foster a relationship with mathematics. In order for my students to be using these 8 mathematical practices, again, it goes back to me having to model it. And so if I'm not modeling this and offering opportunities for this, my students aren't going to be successful with it. The hope is that these are seamlessly integrated into my curriculum. It's not another thing I have to do. It's not an add-on. That this happens naturally with the mathematics. These are the behaviors, the attitudes that I want to see as my students are interacting with the mathematics. And you know, far too often, many people see mathematics as a spectator sport. I'm going to sit idly by and watch the teacher solve the equation on the board, and then I got it. Not really, but I'm just going to watch, and if I don't get it, I'll watch my neighbor do it, and then I'll try and see what I can get from there. But mathematics is not a spectator sport. We need to be engaged in it. So the math practices really encourage and supports best practices that we're already using in our classroom. In order to implement the math practices, I don't have to change my curriculum to do this. This is something that I just need to be aware of and make sure that these opportunities exist. And I'm probably doing a lot of it already with the best practices that I'm doing in my classroom. But really becoming aware of them and then recognizing what am I not offering up for opportunities that I can do. So this is where it becomes your turn. You have a printout of the PowerPoint. So this URL is in the PowerPoint. Inside mathematics, that's where we saw that nice little video with poor little Alvin. You're going to, in the beginning I came around and told you your table number or group number. That's the mathematical practice number you're going to investigate. We're doing a jigsaw activity. So if you're group number 4, you're going to be investigating modeling mathematics, which is math practice number 4. And you should have a handout of the math practices in there as well, so there's a narrative description of the practice. Also, you have a packet of worksheets. The blue one I'm thinking, everyone, I love the color coding, I have to tell you, thank you for the color coding. So this blue worksheet has some focus questions as you're investigating. And so there's 8 worksheets, one for each of the mathematical practices. So find the practice that you're going to be investigating. So as you view the videos, and look at them through that continuum. There's multiple grades that are expressed. When you go to this website, you'll pick math practices and then select the math practice that you're looking at. Watch some videos, talk in your groups, read over the description of the paragraph, and kind of answer these questions. The goal is, before lunch, this is the activity you're going to work on until lunchtime, we're going to do a jigsaw activity where each group is going to share out what they've learned about their math practice to the whole group. There's chart paper over here. There's markers up on the board. And so now this is where it gets to be your turn. Enjoy.
Just flip on They're always wondering what magic is.